Welcome, 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 and three more welcomes to everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you, everybody, for coming out here, part of our continuing series where we talk to reporters, writers, activists, columnists, professors, anybody who works in the ground, anybody who works on academia, in academia, anybody on the left, anybody on the right. As long as they're thoughtful perspectives, we want to package them and bring them unedited to you, the public, directly so that you could do this thing that was popular when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't. With us today, it is our privilege to have Professor Gordon Hanson. He's a professor in urban policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. He is also the chair of the Social and Urban Policy Area at the Harvard Kennedy School, a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Yes, that's right, CFR. He is past co-editor of the Journal of Economic Perspectives, the Review of Economics and Statistics, and the Journal of Development Economics. Hanson received his PhD in economics from MIT in 1992 and a BA in economics from Occidental College. Prior to joining Harvard in 2020, he held the Pacific Economic Cooperation Chair in International Economic Relations at UC San Diego, where he was founding director of the Center on Global Transformation. Hanson previously served on the economics faculties of the University of Michigan and the University of Texas. In his scholarship, Hanson studies the labor market consequences of globalization. He has published extensively in top economic journals, is widely cited for his research by scholars from across the social sciences, and is frequently quoted in major media outlets. His current research addresses the causes and consequences of regional job loss, the effectiveness of place-based policies in alleviating regional economic distress, and the labor market consequences of the energy transition. He's taught at Harvard University. He's also taught at UC San Diego, all global policy, also at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and the University of Texas at Austin. And this was the article where we found him. But first, let's check in and see how well we did. Professor, did I get anything wrong? Do we need to correct anything? Anything at all?
All good.
Okay. Oh, hey, all right. We made the first round. Okay. Good. Thank you for coming out. Let's get right to the meat and potatoes. This article, Importing Polarization, the Electoral Consequences of Rising Trade Exposure. Could you tell us all, why did you write this? Why did you think this was worthwhile writing, studying, spending time thinking about? And before you answer, if you could answer both as an academic and as just an American with two working eyeballs. And if you could pretend as though I've been in a cave for 7 years. I don't know what's going on. Why was this an important topic? What's going on in America? Why is this worthwhile to speak and write about?
So this paper came at the end, toward the end of a stream of research I've been producing with David Otter from MIT and David Dorn at the University of Zurich, in which we've been trying to understand the broader economic and social implications of manufacturing job loss. We have studied this in the particular context of how the U.S. economy has responded to increasing import competition from China. This is something that started in the early 1990s, really took off later in the decade, and hit with full force in the early 2000s. Globalization and trade with China is a big part of what globalization has meant for the U.S. is just one of the things that's caused manufacturing job loss. There's also been important changes in technology. There's been the fact that rising incomes nationally mean that people want fewer manufactured goods and more services. So we don't claim to have a monocausal explanation for why manufacturing jobs have disappeared, but we feel like we have some leverage on why those jobs have been lost in particular places, and then what that has meant for communities. What we found in that work is that when places saw substantial job loss, say from factories closing, they didn't recover well. They didn't launch into new manufacturing activities or attract industries outside of manufacturing. What you had was a period of economic distress associated with low employment rates, lower earnings, in particular for folks without a college education, and other examples of economic dislocation in terms of families breaking up, more kids living with single parents and living in poverty. And the point of this paper was to say, well, were there political ramifications from those quite profound economic changes at the local level.
Has rising import competition contributed to the polarization of U.S. politics? Analyzing multiple measures of political expression and results of congressional and presidential elections spanning the period 2000 through 2016, we find strong, though not definitive, evidence of an ideological realignment in trade-exposed labor markets that commences prior to the divisive 2016 U.S. presidential election. Prior to exploring the exogenous component of rising import competition by China, we find that trade-exposed electoral districts simultaneously exhibit growing ideological polarization in some domains, meaning expanding support for both strong left and strong right views, and pure rightward shifts in others. Specifically, trade impact commuting zones or districts saw an increased market share for the Fox News channel, a stronger ideological polarization in campaign contributions, and a relative rise in the likelihood of electing a Republican to Congress. Trade-exposed counties with an initial majority white population became more likely to elect a GOP conservative, while trade-exposed counties with an initial majority minority population became more likely to elect a liberal Democrat, where in both sets of counties, these gains came at the expense of moderate Democrats. It sounds like you're saying some people got burned out from globalization, and the losers of this shift seem to be moving more towards the right politically. Am I misinterpreting that?
That's correct. The losers moving toward the right, where we want to kind of add the caveat, it looks like areas that are, which would have large concentrations of non-college educated white people, places where that had a lot of job loss in regions where that would be kind of the demographic makeup, saw increased support for more conservative Republicans during this period of concentrated job loss.
However, it says you're talking about the polarization seemed to exist before 2016. I think I read that in there.
Oh, to be sure. So
what do you mean by that? Because we're told, I'm in California, and we're told everything was perfect before Trump, and he alone by himself ruined everything. Is that not true?
So when we talk about polarization, what we mean, political polarization,
sure.
What we mean is that the middle of America, so folks who hold what we'll call centrist political beliefs, have become less common, and folks who hold beliefs either on the political right or either on the political left have become more common. And this could be because the existing population is changing their beliefs, or young people coming along hold more polarized beliefs in the past. It takes kind of further research to figure out where this actually comes from. So the backstory is political scientists have been developing techniques to characterize how conservative and how liberal members of Congress are. And it's a kind of very creative use of congressional roll call votes, where we observe members of Congress voting again and again and again. And you're able to see, are there patterns there? Do some people, do we see Dianne Feinstein voting with Ted Cruz sometimes, and then other times she's voting with Bernie Sanders? Or do we see Dianne Feinstein always voting with Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz always voting with Josh Hawley?
Right.
So using those techniques, what political scientists found is that beginning kind of in the very late 1970s, we saw evidence that political polarization began to rise. And that meant that that there was a larger block of conservative voting members of Congress and a larger block of liberal voting members of Congress. And their likelihood of voting together was going down and kept going down kind of pretty much up to the present day. As political scientists have measured this, most of that move was folks on the right moving further to the right, and the folks on the left moving a bit to the left. So the polarization was happening more by increasing conservative viewpoints on the congressional right, and a moderate leftward shift of those on the left. So that's what those data say. That's motivated us to think about, well, could there be economic factors behind the increased political divisiveness in the US? Because there's lots of historical evidence to suggest that during hard economic times, you see stronger political divisions. And we wanted to know whether that's been true in the current era.
Is that what you found?
And that is, we find evidence consistent with hard economic times leading to a wider gulf in political viewpoints. But I want to, first, acknowledge that we're studying one factor that could have contributed to political division, and that's manufacturing job loss.
Sure.
The political divisiveness, as I just mentioned, as we measured it, it's been going on for better part of 4 decades. So we're very aware of the political chasm that exists in the United States. That chasm long predates Donald Trump. I think we first became aware of how intense the political divisions were between the two parties in the early 1990s. Newt Gingrich's contract with America and Bill Clinton's answer to that. We had intense political debates at that moment in time, and that those divisions, as we can measure them, have become more intense over time. We're only looking at an episode which really happened in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So that manufacturing job loss cannot fully explain why America has become more divided politically. It just highlights how economic hardship can harden political divisions between people.
So globalization, manufacturing job loss, definitely a correlation, but to say that is the and only the factor causing polarization, incorrect. There's probably some other factors in addition to that.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Because the economic forces we're looking at, as I mentioned, didn't kick in really until the late 1990s, and that's almost 2 decades after political polarization had begun.
Right.
Now, there have been other factors contributing to greater economic polarization that began in the early 1980s. And there's a group of political scientists who have studied how they've put forward the hypothesis that widening income inequality in the United States, which began kind of as a phenomenon in the early 80s, is related to rising political division. I think that terrain is a bit more contested. It's not because the ideas are implausible, just because you have kind of 2 big national things happening at the same moment in time. It's hard to control for every possible other thing that might be at work behind why divides between the left and the right have become more intense.
I find that interesting because I have heard about globalization and manufacturing loss as a cause for polarization, but to actually talk to somebody who's looked into it and say it's a cause, but no one should be going around saying it's the cause. I think that's roughly what you're getting at. There's got to be some other things going at, and largely I think what you're getting at is the timeline. We have, for a fact, political polarization evidenced in the late 1970s, yet the people reacting to globalization starts in the late 1990s. So how'd you get all that polarization for 2 decades before the globalization issue? It's got to be something else. That makes a lot of sense. Can we fix it? I know this is asking you to extrapolate a lot, but the audience has no background in this subject. Also, they don't know. Is it possible for us to, follow Donald Trump's vision of make America great again, and then we bring all the manufacturing back here and everybody gets a job like they had in the 1960s? Or is this a bygone era we can never really get back, in your opinion?
So there's a bunch of constructive things I think we can do.
Sure.
Whether that helps us to turn back the clock in terms of the job loss that we've experienced over the past couple of decades, that you just can't do. Economists have learned, and economists often learn things that everyday people known for their whole lives. We just find the data and document it and systematize it.
I tried to explain to my brother once. There was a scientific study that came out that proved the graviton particle. He's like, who cares? So what? And I go, he's like, gravity works. We all knew that. And I go, yeah, but they didn't prove it. And he just didn't get it. He was like, yeah, we all know gravity works. Why are you jumping all up and down? They actually saw a graviton particle because they proved it. It's the difference between we all know it. Anyways, whatever. Yes, totally agree with you. Sorry.
So one of these things that we learned a couple of decades ago, and the ramifications of which we, only beginning to fully appreciate, is how traumatic job loss is for individuals, for families, for communities. What research shows is that when you lose a job, say because your company shuts down or it downsizes dramatically, on average, the typical person is going to see about a 15% hit in their annual earnings in the year in which that job loss occurs. And over the course of their working lives, they never fully make it back.
Right.
They suffer about on average, a 5% hit to their annual earnings going a decade, even 2 decades into the future. When we're thinking about globalization or technological change, or maybe the energy transition as it comes down the pike, what those forces do is cause not just you to lose your job, but multiple factories in the same industry, in the same place, to go out of business at the same moment in time. So now one family's job loss has become an entire community, an entire region's job loss. And we have come to appreciate how we're just not very good at helping people adapt to those sorts of major disruptions. I think we've learned some things about how we can do it better. But after kind of figuring this stuff out, this kind of what motivated me to undertake a big new project with my colleague, Danny Roderick, at the Harvard Kennedy School, in which we're trying to understand the potential for place-based policies to help remediate the disruptions of job loss and the hardship that many Americans have experienced over the past couple of decades.
I remember reading an article, 10 years ago, and it was by a rural Republican. And he was talking about globalization and how it's hollowed out a lot of small towns across America, a lot of manufacturing base. And, when he's in Congress, a lot of people, and this is 10 years ago, right? Nobody's heard of Trump running for office. They just know he's a TV star. He hasn't really polarized. So he wasn't really in the debate. And he was going, I'm in Congress. And when we talk about economic productivity in the economy, all the money goes to the coast. All the money goes to the coast, goes to the big companies, because that's where the big cities are. And he goes, but there's thousands of little towns in the interior of America, and they're just being emptied out. We need a 1950s Marshall Plan level investment to invest in these communities, to create like small job centers throughout America so that we won't be losing all these people. And he got absolutely no support for that bill. And that was a decade ago. And no one talks about doing that kind of investment now. Is that what it would take for us to return back? I mean, a massive level of investment across America, retrofitting and retraining and everybody getting ready for a new economy on the scale we haven't seen since maybe the 1950s.
I don't know if it needs to be massive investment. I think there's 2 important things we can do. One is when job loss occurs, and we've got a bunch of job loss that may happen if we do in fact move away from fossil fuels, it's going to disrupt a whole bunch of industries and a whole bunch of communities. And
Say that again.
If we do in fact move away from fossil fuels, it will disrupt a whole bunch of industries and a whole bunch of communities, cause another round of job loss. This hypothetical about how do we deal with job loss, it's not looking backwards and how could we have redone the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s and done it better. This is of tremendous importance for what's going to come down the line. So I would highlight 2 things that we could do to improve things. And I don't think they're budget busters. One is to make unemployment insurance work much, much better. What we need to do is when unemployment insurance puts money in people's pocket when you lose your job, not of your own causing. And in normal times, what you get is a fraction of your previous paycheck for 6 months. We know that for the worker who's right in the median of the U.S. income distribution, when those unemployment insurance benefits run out and they haven't found a job yet, their spending plummets. They don't have access to credit lines. They don't have access to savings. They don't have access to other sources of funding that help them adjust. When you're losing your job in a town, a community, a region where your entire industry or a collection of industries is disappearing, that adjustment is all the more traumatic. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do is make unemployment insurance more generous and longer lasting when it's happening in mass. So one of the places we studied that was really hard hit by import competition for China were communities that were specialized in producing furniture. China ended up sending huge quantities of low-priced furniture to the United States, and that really hurt places that make furniture like Martinsville, Virginia, which had half of its working age population employed in manufacturing, a lot of those in furniture plants. Hickory, North Carolina. Those sorts of places should qualify for more generous unemployment insurance when it's hitting the region as a whole. So that's kind of triage. You're putting money in people's pockets that then helps them do what? Go to community college, get a certificate tied to an occupation in an industry that might be expanding locally or regionally. Pay off some debts so that aren't going to get kicked out of your home or lose your car, or if it makes sense for you to relocate to another place in which job opportunities might be more abundant. Whatever it is you need to do, putting money in the pockets of people who've lost their jobs in communities that have been hit by massive job loss is really important. We learned from the Great Recession that this, in fact, can work quite effectively. The second thing has to do with making career and technical training, so retraining folks who need to move from one line of activity to another line of activity, and starting small businesses in these places easier to do. And I'll stop there. I'm sure you got some questions. But one is kind of a short-term thing. What do you do right after job loss has occurred? And two is a longer run thing. How do we encourage investment in people and investment in new businesses that help bring jobs back to the places where they've disappeared?
I think that would work. It sounds like the plan is not to get back our industrial base. It's to make it easier for people to transition to new types of economies.
Well, getting back the industrial base, it's not like the president of the United States can decide we're going to bring manufacturing back.
Sure.
Donald Trump put tariffs on imports from China. My own research, and this is stuff that just came out with the same group of authors that with whom I wrote the paper that we're talking about today, we didn't find any positive employment effects of the Trump tariffs.
Really?
Not at all. And there's some good reasons for that, which I can discuss. President Biden is trying to engineer a return of semiconductor manufacturing to the United States. U.S., you go all the way back to the 1960s when semiconductors as an industry were created, it was all produced in the U.S. And now semiconductors are designed in the U.S. but produced elsewhere. He has goals of bringing that semiconductor manufacturing back, and he may accomplish some of that, but it's hard for a president to engineer bringing entire sectors back. What presidents can do is create conditions that allow new industries, new lines of activity to emerge wherever it makes most sense for those new activities to happen, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in services, whether it's in something else.
Yeah. I didn't know that about Trump's tariffs. That's fascinating. And I think that's an important piece of information that, he was like, I'm going to bring the jobs back and we're going to be tough on the the countries that we have a trade imbalance with. And here, that did not bring the jobs back, because that's been a long run theory. That theory's been around for decades. If we just got tough with China and started dealing with our trade imbalances, all the jobs would come rushing back. To hear that we tried it and it didn't work, wow. That's really impressive. How much of this, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying explains what I've heard from mainstream media as to the average Trump voter. It was people in the interior of America, in the Rust Belts. He famously took the Rust Belts from Hillary Clinton, and these were white, rural, conservative people who had seen their industrial base leave and were largely living in towns that had seen better days 10, 20 years before. Is that what we're talking about? It sounds like the people you're describing sound like the people who voted for Trump in the Rust Belt in 2016.
Many of them, yes. I don't want to say that we've come up with the single explanation for why the Rust Belt turned to favor Trump. Many other things going on in the U.S. economy and in U.S. society. Culture and how we think about culture is a big part of the current divisions that are happening in the country. But if you in Middle America in 2016 said, as I look around, I feel like my community, the people I live with, have gotten the short end of the stick economically, you had very strong claims, strong grounds to make that claim. And if Donald Trump came along saying, I hear you and I want to do something for you, I understand why that resonated politically. I don't think the Trump tariffs on China were the answer to that. And I think the research that will come out will show that, today, and there are a number of reasons why his particular approach was unlikely to be effective. But you certainly see the motivation for saying existing politicians, the political class has failed us. It's failed our whole region.
Yeah. I just recall that a lot of sociologists who were looking at Trump voters were saying it's people who are white, rural, conservative, live in less diverse places in the interior of America and feel like society left them behind. They feel like they got the losing end of the stick. They used to be on the winning team and now they're on the losing team. And that makes them resentful and fearful of loss. And politically, fear of loss is a much stronger motivator for voting and following a politician than the belief that you could gain something. It's kind of bizarre, but people will fight to protect scraps way more than they'll actually fight to go get a steak dinner. That's just some psychology.
Yeah, no, I would heartily agree. And economic history bears that out. In times of hardship, people are open to arguments they wouldn't be open to in normal times.
Right.
Work by Barry Eichengreen, who's an economic historian at UC Berkeley, looked at the 1930s in Europe and looked at places that were harder hit by the Great Depression, which happened in Europe just like it happened here.
Right.
Europe in the 1930s was pretty wild in that you had parties running for office that represented the entire political spectrum, all the way from ardent communists to the fascists who would, go on to support Mussolini and Hitler. And what they found during that period is that in areas where the Great Depression hit harder, you saw more support for extreme politicians, especially on the right, which echoes very much to what we found more recently in the U.S. context.
So you found evidence in the 1930s depression, or there was evidence in the 1930s depression.
Yeah.
For this. Wow. Kind of explains a little bit about Hitler. And I think it was, who was it? Famous British economist. We've based Keynes.
John Maynard Keynes.
Yeah, and he was one of the negotiators for England in World War I. And he told them, don't make it this harsh on the Germans because they will become resentful and it's going to blow up in our face again. And he was completely ignored. And then World War II happened, exactly as he predicted. And he said, and this was an economist, he goes, you cannot beat a dead horse. Sorry. And they're like, no, they're going to pay. And in response for that, we got another war. If manufacturing jobs don't come back, if nobody can return them, Biden, Trump, nobody, if we're not able to really transition people to the new economy, and we have a husk, a mass of humans in the interior of America who just keep getting left further behind and just keep seeing their neighborhoods shrink and just keep seeing jobs leave and just keep seeing nothing getting better. Where does this go? Does it get better or does it get worse politically?
Well, I don't think that future is preordained.
Okay.
And so what are the signs of hope? One is, we've probably bottomed out in terms of the manufacturing exodus. So I said that the Trump tariffs hadn't really brought manufacturing back. Manufacturing has come back of its own accord in different areas for different reasons. At its lowest point, manufacturing was down to 8% of US employment. And just, not big numbers. What that means is that if you want to bring good jobs to middle America, where good jobs are scarce, even if you increase the size of manufacturing by 50%, you're still only at 12% of employment. It's just not going to solve the problem of middle America. It might help in certain places, but it's in outside of manufacturing where that has to be part of our focus. What we have seen is lots of regions have done inventive things to find good jobs outside of manufacturing, in particular for workers without a 4-year college degree. So this includes in healthcare. You think of healthcare as something you go to your doctor, you see the nurse, they live in your city, and it's not a sector that can drive growth in a region. That's increasingly not true. We're creating regional healthcare hubs that might be based in one city, but that'll serve a pretty wide area. So Scranton, Pennsylvania has developed a quite robust healthcare services industry cluster that serves people way outside of Scranton. Healthcare has some very good jobs, and I'm not talking about for MDs. I'm talking about for folks who have.
Oh yeah.
So that's one example. We continue to go through this digital transformation in which businesses, government, households are using digital information and digital services in new ways. There are a lot of jobs in IT that do not require a college degree that are about helping businesses and government and households make that switch. Community colleges are very good at designing and expanding these programs. Not every community college, but we have some real shining lights out there that have figured out how to develop good programs in healthcare, in IT, and in manufacturing, as well as in transportation, as well as in the construction trades, that can be a source of creating jobs that'll pay more than 40 grand a year for somebody who will have a certificate, a 2-year degree, but something well short of a 4-year degree.
Just to back you up, that's exactly what's going on here in Fresno. We had ag as our major economy, and then about 15 years ago, they started realizing that we had a hospital called Fresno Children's Hospital, and it just sort of coincidentally became the best children's hospital between San Francisco and LA. And so everybody between San Francisco and LA was sending all their kids to this one hospital, and they literally built up a medical industry with 4 more hospitals since then. And we take basically all the patients throughout the Central Valley. So, and they did that so that we had a second industry here other than just ag, because our economy used to be very cyclical. When ag was good, we were good. When ag was bad, we just all the way went down because we had no second driver. So absolutely, they did that.
I'm going to blow your mind for a second. My family was part of that. I grew up in Fresno.
Hey.
My parents were both physicians there. My brother is a physician there. And so my family goes back several generations in the Central Valley. So lots of love to Fresno.
And if you are being advised by Dr. Hanson, that's a family member?
My brother is the orthopedic surgeon that has helped Fresno State athletics for a couple of decades now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Anything to do with Fresno State. Yeah, okay. He's a hero. All right.
Uh,
All
okay,
right. Oh,
so
yeah. People are big on Fresno State here. Yeah. I'm
let's
not
talk.
even in, I'm
Let's
not
talk
even in
President.
football, but I love the games. You just go to a Fresno State game, half the city's there. That's one of the cool things about Fresno.
But let's talk Fresno State for a moment. Not athletics, but it's academics. There's a group of labor economists at Harvard who have an organization called Opportunity Insights, and it's a lab that looks into, how do we help kids who come from, the bottom 10%, bottom 20% of households in terms of income, move up on the income ladder. And a key engine of that mobility are good community colleges and good four-year universities that target local populations. The California State University system comes in very high on that list, and Fresno State is part and parcel of that. So you look at who's the student body of Fresno State, it's a bunch of kids who are first-generation college students. And that's the sort of institution, not the Harvards of the world, that are going to create economic mobility for folks who come from families that may not have experienced that in the past.
I can totally see that, because Fresno State University or California State University, Fresno's there, it can only focus on the city. So it has to be very focused on the city. And are we providing goods for these people? And absolutely, like what you're talking about. We have something called University High School, where they put a high school inside Fresno State specifically to encourage disadvantaged minorities to go to college, so that every day you're going to high school, you're seeing college. And they're getting you ready for, come on, do well at high school, and you literally will move 100 feet over and you'll be in college. And it's worked wonderfully. I think it's won some national awards. It does a lot to encourage minority children and disadvantaged children, not all minorities, some just disadvantaged kids, to believe, that could be me. That I don't have to do what my parents did. I could do something more. It's been very, very breathtaking. I guess we're winding down. How hopeful are you that we will make the changes that we need in order to transition people? I certainly get manufacturing is gone. You certainly educated me on the fact that even when Trump tried to bring manufacturing back with the tariffs on China, it didn't work. And also manufacturing is down to 8%. Like you said, if we doubled it, it's still a fraction of the economy. So we can't really rely on, we're going to bring those 1950s jobs back, and that's how we're going to get America up. And I know that's what a lot of people have been alluding to. It sounds like that can't happen. How much hope do you have that we modify unemployment, provide the adequate training, get these people who feel left behind in the interior of America new jobs in rising industries? Do you see positive signs that America might get it and do what it takes to do that?
I do. And the positive signs I see comes from experimentation that's happening at the local level in terms of how we figure out how we turn ourselves around, because given gridlock in Washington and given the way that federal budgetary rules work, as you suggested, it's hard to get money out of the system if you're not New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago. And what we see are folks being quite inventive. There are a number of nonprofit organizations that have developed excellent sectoral training programs, which take disadvantaged youth or folks who've been long-term unemployed, provide targeted training in occupations tied to specific sectors, as well as what's called wraparound services, helping you imagine what your future can be if you get this additional training. What sort of career options are available to you? How do you interview for a job? How do you make sure you hold your job once you have it? We have some very exciting stuff happening in terms of supporting small business. Most job growth in America is created by young, small firms. Making small business work is vital to helping regions turn themselves around. So there are examples of innovations in the policy space, as you want to think of it, which America has always excelled at. And I'm hopeful that those examples will diffuse and that places can learn from each other. So while Washington fights with itself, the money we already have in the system can be applied towards these ideas of how we get worker training, education of young people, and support for new small businesses right.
Sounds like you're saying if we're looking for a solution to reduce polarization or fix problems in America, it's going to be us, and don't look to Congress. Am I getting that wrong?
Well, it'd be nice to look to Congress, and I don't want to count Congress out. And Congress does authorize money that flows into the system. But it is, in typical American fashion, it will be local civic organizations that help bring people together to find solutions to longstanding problems. And we see examples of this all over the country. The problem is there are many places in which those sorts of organizations just don't exist. Places have been hit too hard to be able to bounce back. But the fact that we see local solutions involving people from the left and right, when you get down to the local level, there's nothing political about job growth. People on the left want more jobs. People on the right want more jobs. People on the left and right both want those jobs to pay good wages to young people and people who may have missed out on economic opportunity. And that concentrates the mind in a way that, at least at the local level, diffuses some of that intense division that we see on C-SPAN every night.
Fair enough. I have to bring up, though, the famous case of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Amazon came through. They were going to employ thousands of people in her district. Thousands. And she said, we don't want those jobs because you're a corporate sellout and we'd rather be poor. And then she stayed in office after saying that. That's not a good sign, right? I mean, she totally politicized an employment decision, made it political, and drove them out of town, and then won an election after she did that.
So the Amazon case is an example of what I hope we don't do when it comes to helping, because what's the Amazon case? The Amazon case is, here we have this trophy firm, and Amazon's going to get every community in the country to bid on having the privilege of hosting Amazon.
Sure.
At the end of the day, you bid so much that all the gains that Amazon's going to bring to you, they've already extracted in the form of this benefit or that benefit. Many communities have been deluded by the fact that our savior is that one trophy firm, and we just bribe them enough to have them come, it will change our fortunes. Many communities have learned that it just doesn't work. They're not going to go to places where the job growth is needed the most. They want to go to places that are already doing well economically. And that when you devote that much money, you've depleted the tax revenues that you could use for worker training, for small business development, for other things that can help communities generate a self-reinforcing process of growth and development. So I am not a fan of the trophy firm model of promoting local economic development. Not to say anything for or against AOC in that particular instance, but I wouldn't want communities to say our answer is getting Amazon to locate in our backyard, because I don't think it is.
Sure. I was just saying that was a local issue. It was going to be about jobs, and she completely politicized it, made it a national issue, and that's what she was running on. It was not just do we want jobs or local. It was very much, she was speaking to a national audience so that she could secure more funding, because she gets a lot of funding through Twitter and social media. And she slammed the hell of an evil, wicked corporation. And you're right, they lost a lot of the tax base, but it's years later. They never got jobs. Those people never got retrained. They never got employed. They just lost. And I'm wondering, are we going to see that more in the future? Because she's quite popular. And in urban areas, there's a lot of people who think like her. All corporations are evil, wicked, and bad and nasty, and we don't need them. Will that be a problem if that sort of behavior continues if our solution is local job growth?
Yeah. So again, I'll come back to, I like to look for things that we can agree on that will work and not things that divide us.
Okay.
Giving money to Amazon is going to be politically divisive. And we don't have a lot of evidence that getting an Amazon in your backyard promotes job growth. We just don't. We have better evidence, and there are reasons for that, because Amazon distribution centers just don't pay very well. So if you think that getting an Amazon distribution center is going to be the key to your economic development, it's probably not right. It's not. I would rather see on the margin money go for training workers that are going to put them in jobs that pay more than $18 an hour.
Okay. Okay. It sounds a little bit like, though, I remember a phrase called beggars can't be choosers. And, you're struggling to get businesses in there. You're struggling to have a tax base. You're struggling to have jobs. And then you're going to be like, well, listen, I just wonder if it gets better. Because those people never got jobs. They still stayed depressed. They never, thousands of people, no jobs still years later. She never replaced it. So they never did the alternative. They're just stuck.
I'm not arguing to keep Amazon out. I'm saying, do we want to be bribing Amazon to locate in our community? And I think
sure.
The answer, that money has better uses than tax breaks to a single big firm as the solution to our problems. Let me give you an example of probably the most egregious example of this strategy misfiring. And that comes from Kansas City. So Kansas City straddles the state of Kansas and the state of Missouri. In the early 2010s, folks in Missouri got the idea, well, we want to increase job growth in Missouri. Who's the easiest firms that we can convince to come locate in Missouri? Well, they're firms that are on the Kansas side of within the Kansas City metropolitan area. So folks on the Missouri side of Kansas City went over to the Kansas side of Kansas City and said, here's some tax breaks, just move across the river. And they did. And then Kansas said, oh, not so fast. We're going to come right back at you. Over the course of about 10 years, Kansas and Missouri together spent $350 million bribing firms to move from one side of the border to the other side of the border. By definition, it was a zero contribution to economic activity in the broader region, because all they did was change their zip code. They didn't change their region. It's an example of the sort of danger that we can fall into when we think about economic development purely in terms of there's that one big firm whose appearance will change everything.
Fair enough. Okay, winding down. Last two questions. This is the favorite one I love doing. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third-party person who's watching this video, and they learned a lot. I learned a lot, some things I didn't know. But there's a lot of material, and they're struggling to remember it all. And it's 5 days from now after they watch this video. And while they struggle to remember everything, there was this one thing that the professor said. And while they struggle to remember all the stuff they learned in that video, they can't get that one thought out of their head when thinking about political polarization in America. What is that thought that you want to be sticky and for an average person you'll never meet to not be able to stop thinking about when they're thinking about the problems our country faces?
It would be that we know job loss is painful. If we handle job loss poorly, it creates not only economic hardship, it creates political trauma that lives with us for a long time.
Yeah. I remember my grandma crying when I was a boy, and they were just showing a documentary about FDR. And the guy had been dead 30, 40 years. And she was just crying because she remembered when he came through and there was a chicken in every pot. That's what she told me. And, that she remembered how bad it was and getting out of it. And it still meant a lot to her almost half a century later, to the point that she became visibly shaken just looking at the man. Certainly, yeah. I mean, that's how bad economics can affect you. Decades later, you're still impacted. I hope you found this was a fair interview. You got to say your piece. We didn't alter anything. Is there anybody else that you know who may want to be part of an honest conversation? You don't have to name anybody, but we always try to keep it going. Is there anybody that could be an academic or an activist on the left or on the right? Anybody you can think of who might be willing to be part of this kind of conversation about just how do you see it and how do we get out of this?
So I'm not going to name names, but I will give you a theme.
Thank you.
And that is that we're living in a moment where the intensity of the political attacks from the right to the left and the left to the right are at an all-time high. And yet what we see folks, elected politicians saying about economic policy on the left and the right seems to be converging. I take that as a hopeful sign. Biden didn't undo the Trump tariffs.
Right.
If Trump were to replace Biden, I'm guessing that there is a lot in what Biden did regarding the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of tax incentives for different types of investment that Trump probably wouldn't undo either. So I would love some insight into how we can be converging in terms of economic policy, but still can't stand to be in the same room with each other.
Brilliant. Because I've also heard people that's the other things that people are saying, or academics and experts on political polarization are saying we're getting polarized. You can see it. You can see it. You can see people being upset about some of these issues, but then they'll go, but there's also other issues that don't seem to matter anymore. Gay rights used to be a very polarizing issue 20 years ago. It just doesn't seem to be as polarizing anymore. That's what I'm seeing in some of the academic literature and people there. Like it was a dividing issue. And then it seemed like begrudgingly, not perfectly, the right kind of realized they're not going to push back and they need to make some begrudging openness for that. So that's something I've seen some academics say, that used to be very polarizing and there's been a convergence. Even while people continue to pull apart, some things we converge on. The economics issues is brilliant because you're right. Not well acknowledged in the media, but Biden kept a lot of the tariffs on China implemented by Trump that he complained about while as president when Trump was doing it, but then kept them quietly when he was president. So yeah, that shows convergence. We'll leave it there. I want to say thank you for coming out, Professor. I really appreciate your time, and I will email you a copy of the video shortly in a couple hours.
Great. Thank you very much, Marcus. I really appreciate it. I did not realize we had the Fresno connection, but I delighted that we were able to kind of share this little Fresno.
I think that's awesome. Fresno. Yeah. Hey, we're coming up, okay? 800.
Roosevelt High School, class of 1982.
Wow. Edison.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. I'll email you shortly. And always keep Fresno in your heart. We will keep doing
I do and I will.
Okay.
Bye-bye.